I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's virtual event from the Milwaukee Rep and Boswell Book Company, part of our virtual event series. So, as it is, Boswell Day 4191. We have been dreaming of this book for months and months. I read a manuscript a long time ago. I'm not going to say what I said, but perhaps Mr. Akhtar will. But I will say that even before that, several visits ago, when Mr. Akhtar was talking about what he was working on, the new book is Homeland Elegies. It is an unflinching novel about searching for belonging in America. It has won praise from all over, New York Times, National Public Radio, a beautiful profile in New Yorker, and this Ron Charles review that sort of blew me away in the Washington Post. He is one of my favorite critics. And I'd just like to say what he wrote a little tiny bit. The challenge of remembering one's identity in a racist culture is at the heart of Akhtar's remarkable new book. But here, Akhtar bounds far beyond the cleverly engineered drama of disgrace. With its sprawling vision of contemporary America, Homeland Elegies is a phenomenal coalescence of memoir, fiction, history, and cultural analysis. It would not surprise me if he wins a second Pulitzer, but for which category? We are so honored to have as our conversation partner tonight, Mark Clements, the artistic director of the Milwaukee Rep. The Milwaukee Rep is also co-sponsoring this event. And the Milwaukee Rep is working on a multi-year project where they are doing productions of all of Akhtar's plays, culminating in an original production. I'm sure we'll hear a little more about that. And we're going to hear a little less from me as I present Akhtar and Mark Clements. Please give them a big hand, virtually.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Good to be with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel, for hosting this in conjunction with us. We all love Boswell books. We are a Milwaukee treasure, and please buy all your books from Boswell Books. Don't order them on Amazon. Get them directly from Boswell. You can order them online too. It's an amazing company, and we're blessed to have it in our city. Thanks, Ayad, for joining.
Oh my God, it's such an honor. I was telling Daniel at the beginning of this, maybe when we went live, I think I'd been hoping that we would do the launch of the book in Milwaukee, but I haven't been back. So I miss Milwaukee so much. I miss the Rep. I miss Boswell. I always go to Boswell when I'm there. So yeah. Anyway, I miss all of you. I'm sure there's some friends on here, and I miss you.
There's a lot of friends on here. We've got, thank you to everyone for sharing your evening with us and joining the conversation. I always, I can never have enough of shooting shit with Ayad, and so doing that now in front of 259 people is terrific. Actually, as I said that word, we dropped 2 people, so I'll moderate the language. I literally did. I said that word and I saw it go from 259 to 257. So I saw
that
just
happened while you were talking, Mark, not while I was talking.
Exactly. So we'll keep it with you in the main chair, of course. So just to contextualize the relationship that we have with you at Milwaukee Rep, I saw Disgraced at Lincoln Center and at the urging of a friend, and I got the last ticket that was available. It was a very fortuitous event for me in myriad ways. 2013, I think it was 12 or 13, I think 13. And very soon after that, we met at a conference in Dallas, I think it was, and we made the Milwaukee connection. And since that time, we have created an artistic relationship with you, which, as Daniel alluded to, involves doing all of your plays, which in fact we have done: Invisible Hand, Disgrace, The Who and the What, and Junk. I think I'm right in saying that we may be the only singular company worldwide that have done all of your plays. There's
a bunch that have done 3, but nobody's done all 4.
Yeah. So they've been great experiences for us. Obviously, we are adapting American Dervish, your first novel, together, which is wonderful, and we're kind of looking forward to the future of that. And I just want to say that you, 2 years ago, you became a trustee of Milwaukee Rep. You've been a significant, a great advocate for the company, and also a significant fundraiser, particularly for new play development, of which we are truly grateful, feeding the pipeline of American theater. So that has been great. And of course, new plays are one of the company's top 3 strategic priorities as well. So it's a big deal to have you behind that. But here, tonight, we are here to discuss your new novel, primarily Homeland Elegies. Congratulations on Daniel for the incredible reception and reviews it's been garnering, and rightly so. You know, somebody who I call a friend, it's always a relief to kind of, when you read the book, and especially when you get a chance like I did to read it way before, and you go, please God, let this be good, you know, and it blew my mind. And you know that I would temper it. It doesn't really matter what I think, but it blew my mind, and because it's so vast. And I just finished a second pass at it. I finished it today in preparation for this, but I listened to it on audiobook, which was like you did American Dervish, which is, and please read the book, buy the hard copy, but also buy the audio book as well, because you get you doing all the voices of the folks and in the book, and it's a real treat. So, but I just realized from the second reading, you've written this huge epic American novel. It's been likened to the epic nature of the sweep and scope of it, of The Great Gatsby, and I feel like it really is in that realm. I mean, it's just come out, so it's hard to ascertain the full impact of it, but outside of the reviews and things you've been getting. But it's just so epic, and what I realized through the second pass is just how you can't, every chapter, there's usually 1 or 2 things in a chapter of a book. Your chapters are littered with 25 epic events. You know, it's massive. And kudos to you and for writing such a important and sweeping novel that's kind of funny and witty and yet really deeply disturbing. I mean, there are moments when I just have to, you know, I was laughing out loud, and moments when I had to put it down and walk away. And I think it's a great, you know, that's what I want out of something. And I think the other thing that you bring, which is something to your writing and your plays, which I think we're in desperate need of and is lacking so dramatically in our country right now, is nuanced conversation about everything, really. And I think you always explore the gray, you know, in the world. And yes, there is this, but there's this point of view as well. And I think we need more of that. And if your book triggers more conversation around that, then kudos to you. I'm cognizant of the fact that not everybody on this call will have read the book, or if you are, you might be in the middle of it. So we're going to be careful about giving things away, talking about endings and stuff. So we'll be respectful of that. But let's start out with just the genesis of the book. Is this a book that when you were thinking, I've got to write a second novel, that you knew what you were doing, or you started on something and you went down a road and a confluence of events, like the book suddenly found you and you had to write it? Because it feels almost confessional in many ways and cathartic. Can you just talk a
Sure.
bit, a lot about that?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for doing this, and thank you everyone for being here again. So I knew I wanted to write a book. So after Junk went up in New York City, and I went to Rome for a fellowship at the American Academy, and I knew I wanted to write a book. And my dad had been through a malpractice lawsuit in Western Wisconsin, and I thought I wanted to write a kind of a compact novel about that, and third-person novel, and just sort of explore what his experience, or a character based on him, the experience of a reckoning at the end of his career, really about his time in America. And I started to write while I was in Rome, and it just wasn't working. The voice, I couldn't find the voice. It just didn't seem to be making sense. And so I kind of put it away. And I've been reading a lot of stuff in Rome, a lot of classical stuff, Livy and, Thucydides and, Machiavelli and whatnot. And one night I was in the library at the American Academy, and I found Leopardi, who's a poet from about 200 years ago, Italian poet. And the first poem in this book, it's called To Italy. And in that, he is addressing the Italian nation and sort of saying, you know, remember who you are and how far you've fallen and all of that sort of stuff. And I just remember thinking, you know, my mom had passed away. My father was showing signs of decline. Trump was in office. Our politics were tearing the country apart. Wisconsin had become a completely different state, a state I didn't recognize anymore. And I was wanting to address that in some way. And when I read that poem, I thought to myself, is there a way that, like Leopardi addressing his fellow citizens or his fellow Italians, could I address my fellow Americans, all of them, irrespective of their political persuasion? Could I speak in a voice that would unify all of us in some way, even if it was saying some harsh things? And I thought, wow, what a grandiose thought. Like, that's ridiculously grandiose. And then I went to sleep that night and I woke up the next morning, and already the first sentence of this book was beginning to form itself. And over the course of the next 2 or 3 days, I wrote the overture of this book, which is called To America, inspired by Leopardi to Italy. So, and then it just unfolded. I wrote the overture, and then I wrote the first chapter about my father and Donald Trump. And then I wrote this next chapter about my mother. And then each thing kind of unfolded from the next. I would write for 2 weeks straight, and then I'd get exhausted, and then I'd stop for 2 weeks, and then I'd start again. And this lasted about 11 months, and then I was finished. And the book was basically in the form it's in now. I kind of just, it came out of me. It was really the first time in my experience where this organic totality just poured out of me. These sentences, these long, rich sentences, just, you know. And when I was done, I remember telling my editor, I couldn't remember anymore the brain that had created this book. Like, it just, when it was finished, it was just disappeared. That brain was gone, whatever it was. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's basically the sort of larger genesis. Let me just say a couple. Can I say something about what the book's about for people who haven't read it?
Please do. Yeah.
Basically, I was thinking that my folks had been here for 50 years. My parents came in 68, and this was 2018 that I was writing, a year that Trump had been in office for a year, and the first chapter is called On the Anniversary of Trump's First Year in Office. And I was thinking about how much the country had changed in that time, and what was the country that they had come to, and what was the country that, you know, my mother had died in, and that my father was, you know, sort of on his way out. And what had happened to their lives as Americans, if you will, here. And what did that say about what America had been to them and what it was, and then what it became and what their lives became? And what did that journey of their journey, and maybe their cohorts, the folks that they came with in the late 60s, and all of their kids, like myself, a writer who had been writing about them and gotten into some trouble with the community for writing about all this stuff. What had happened to all of us? So that's the kind of larger frame of, you know, Jenny Egan, I think, said it's like 101 Nights meets reality television, right? Like, that's kind of, I think that's really spot on. So that's the larger frame. And there's a deeper story. And the deeper story is the evolution of a writer in this American culture, an immigrant kid, son of immigrants, who achieves the American dream, if you will, right? And that's the story of the book. As I think Garner was talking about Gatsby. I think that's why. So,
yeah, you know, I guess a question for me is, in all of your works, in all of your published works, the plays, this now the second novel, we see a lot of sections that seem, you know, authentically biographical, but with twists to allow you to, you know, go where you want to go dramatically. So, you know, in American Dervish, for example, Mina, who's such a key and pivotal character for the young boy, which Hayat Shah, which is really you, or parts of you, growing up in Brookfield as a young boy. Even though Mina doesn't necessarily exist, she's an amalgamation of characters. And we see that in all of your works. I know that conversation we had a lot around Junk was when people said, oh, this is a real departure from him. And I remember you saying, no, it isn't. This is really key to who I am. Actually, there's incredible cross-reference to all of the other works. There's a perception that because it's dealing not so much with a nuclear family, it's dealing with many things that influence that. And in fact, you know, there are references to Milken and other characters who could be characters in Junk and who, are in different forms. But with this book, you have very specifically created a character, the narrator, that is you, that shares the same name as you. And but then in the next sentence, you tell us it's a work of fiction, or is it? So what was the thought behind that? And when did that epiphany arrive really soon, or and what are the thoughts? Because there must be a lot behind that choice.
Well, I realized, as I say, that voice that came out of me, I realized that was my voice. But I also realized as I was writing, in the first few weeks of writing this book, I realized that I was speaking with my voice and I was using a lot of stuff from my life, but I was changing it. And I was just doing it organically. It was happening naturally. I was shaping based on dramatic necessity. And so I thought, I just want to keep having this freedom to do this. And then I started to understand what it was I was really doing, which was that in a way, not even in a way, what I was doing is I was trying to keep myself interested in a texture that felt like a real texture that was connected to the real world as it is, and that was addressing the real world as nonfiction might, and saying things about America today as nonfiction might, and yet I was doing it as a fictional narrator who nevertheless shared many of the facts of my life. And I understood that in a sense what I was doing was I was collapsing fact and fiction in a way in order to keep the reader inside an experience that was drawing from the same obsession with breaking news, fake news, social media, Instagram scroll, that kind of absorption, the loss of time, this sort of like endless perusing of Facebook and all of that, that I was trying to tap into that level of attention so that the book would feel not like a novel. It wouldn't, and because in my hands, it felt like to write about the political events today, it was going to feel like satire no matter what I did. But the way to move away from that feeling was to pivot into something closer to memoir so that the reader is constantly like, wow, is that real? And that game of is it real or is it not real mirrors what's happening in our society, where entertainment has become the dominant model of thinking and politics, and a good story is now the substitute for truth. And so playing that game felt like doing something that art can do at its best, which is trying to do something that art can do at its best, which is to mirror reality, to mirror back the reality that we are now living inside of. Not to criticize it, but to use it almost. I often say I wanted to write a philosophical novel about America that had the addictive thrill of reality television.
And it really is a page turner. I think, you've written something very deep and provocative and that requires us to dig deep, I think, into the book, to invest heavily into it and see, and the reflections. I think we see a lot of ourselves in it, like we do with good work. Whether it's a play or a book, we see a reflection of ourselves, or even though the context and the country and the person may be different, and the religious context that is huge as part of your works, you really get a sense of how deeply affecting it is. As somebody who's been working on American Dervish for a while, I think I said this to you over a dinner at some point. There's a moment when you work on that and you work 6 hours on that novel, and you realize how many resonances of adolescence are kind of pertinent to you too, and how painful that is. And sometimes literally it's a little much. And I'm trying to think, with that moment, maybe talk about, because people are always interested about process. Do you go to work in the morning and write for a certain amount, and what are your golden hours? And were there days when really this was, because this feels like, you said it was streaming out of you. There's some pain in here, man. There's it's deep, and you feel it jumping off the page at you. Were there times when you just I have to kind of take the weekend off? Can you talk about the process around this book, or were you driven?
Well, it's funny. My fiance Annika, she kept reminding me that I should really relish this experience, because the level of flow and joy that I was having as I was writing was also unprecedented. I'd never had that kind of loss of self in the work. So I would just be writing and hours would pass, and I would, again, the language was something I had never been able to articulate, this kind of contradiction and richness. And in a way, I think that, I like to say that maybe it's a result of a certain kind of coming of age where I no longer felt the need to answer any questions anymore, that the questions could just be questions, and I could live inside the tension of the questions. Something that a character in the book says about a good story is it's like a football match, right? When you don't know the outcome, that's when you're most in it. When you know who's going to win, you're almost happy to turn it off because you don't care anymore. But it's when the outcome is still being contested, that's when the focus is highest. And I think that's what it means to live inside the question. When you don't have the answer, but you're pushing to an answer, there's a sweet spot there. And for whatever reason, this book for me was the first time that I was fully seated inside that driving to an answer without having an answer and not necessarily needing one. And it's interesting how what it allowed to emerge, or how much was able to come out because of that, not having to shape it to fit a point of view, if you will.
Were you shocked at any moment of revelation, self-revelation?
Yeah, a lot.
Were there moments?
All the time. I would be writing, and then suddenly something else would happen, and something else would happen, and something else, and I'd be like, wow, I'm getting like the whole 9/11 sequence, right? I remember writing that sequence. I for years and years and years, I thought, okay, I got to write about 9/11. I got to write it. And I never had. I mean, for 20 years, I didn't write about 9/11. And I mean, I wrote around it, but I didn't write about it. And then all of a sudden, there was this 3,000 word sequence in which the narrator talks about that day to a woman he's with, a woman he's dating, another sort of Muslim American, Pakistani American woman. And what came out was the distillation of years and years of stories and emotion and the trauma of our country, not just for Muslims, but for all of us. And the paradox of being Muslim on that day. All of it, sort of, I could not have planned that. It just happened. It was a total shock. And the whole cross thing, it was like, for those of you who haven't read it, you'll get to that. I won't explain it, but hopefully you'll remember in retrospect. The crossing was a total surprise that she would ask about the cross. It's really, so, that's the joy of writing. I mean, I think Faulkner, I think, said something like, it's when the character starts speaking to him. And I remember, as a young writer thinking, well, that sounds like a lot of hooey. That doesn't happen. It's not like that. But it actually can be like that at times, that there's an autonomy. It just takes over.
Yeah, I feel like we see that a lot in rehearsal. When somebody's you're trying to make a connection, a personal connection, to find the emotion in a character, and people will suddenly reveal something very personal in a rehearsal room that they might not have done ever to anyone before. And actually letting those words out of your mouth sort of galvanizes that thought in a moment. And it's revelatory sometimes, it's kind of, and deeply disturbing.
But that's why we're in it. That's why we do this. That's why we
like the pain, you're saying. Right?
Well, no, for that surprise.
Yeah, surprise.
For the exploration into the unknown, the revelation of the unknown. That's why the reader does it too. The reader wants to be surprised. I mean, if you're going to tell the reader the predictable thing, they'll put the book down. They'll stop watching the show. Oh, I know what's going to happen. The thrill, the narrative thrill, is to not know what's going to happen and still be so excited to know what's going to happen next. That's real narrative craft, I think. And it turns out that's also, good. That's revelation, as you say,
Yeah. One of the sections, that popped out for me, and we only really decided amongst ourselves this today that you would read a section very kindly from the book, which I'll get you to set up. But it's interesting to me when I read that, and especially this second time around, I got to that section probably yesterday, and I just literally had to put the book down because it felt like if you were writing something about the world today, this morning, given everything that is going on, I would have totally bought that you could have written that today, just about some of the challenges that this country is facing, and people, working class people will, and what it will continue to be for some while, and it's kind of scary, but I think we need to confront it. So I'll hand over to you at this point just to explain a little further.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read a little section where, so the narrator, who has my name and many of the facts of my life, has, written this play, and it won a big award, and then he gets befriended by a private equity, a hedge fund guy, and the hedge fund guy is running a philanthropic outfit that is trying to do good in the world by changing the conversation about Islam and trying to make Muslims' lives better in America. But there's some odd stuff going on with him. And one of the things that the book tracks is the way the narrator, myself, with many of the facts of my life, gets seduced by money, gets seduced by access to celebrity, and gets seduced by access to this kind of life, right? And he starts spending a lot of time around this financier, and he starts espousing certain values, and the values are like these, I guess these neoliberal values of, I'll read it from a little bit earlier than where you had. In the words of Georges Monbiot, I had become a neoliberal courtier, an aspirant to the ruling class, bearing the foundations, the philanthropic foundations, not-for-profit coat of arms expressly for that purpose, an eclectic and exemplary defender not only of inalienable human rights and enlightened rage, but also of freedom itself, both sexual and monetary, an eager frontline recruit for the purported progressive ideological battles of our time. My awakening from this stupor of self-congratulatory entitlement would be swift and brutal. An accumulation of private and public misfortunes, a copper penny rash on my palms, my mother's death, the election of Donald Trump, would disabuse me of my will to benevolent privilege. I'm ashamed it took me so long to wake up to the bankruptcy of this purported moral vision. Until then, I was susceptible. I was culpable. I was a willing and enthusiastic advocate. The vision of the good life felt good indeed. I was a believer in the politically enlightened, late-stage capitalist individualist creed. I loved Obama. I was tongue-tied with awe when I met Sergey Brin. Who could blame me? What more, what better for anyone, for me, for anyone else did the world have to offer? Before my tumble from this worldview, I spent more time thinking about money than ever before. I knew the life I was leading was predicated on capital. I knew I didn't have any. How much longer would Riaz, this financier, let me float along on the swollen river of his seemingly endless lucre? I didn't know. Money was no object to him, of course, but I could see the writing on the wall. Whatever luster I possessed for those he used to impress would eventually fade. They would tire of my 10-cent words and my canny political provocations. I would fall out of favor, and when I did, it would mean returning to life in my dim, tiny Harlem one-bedroom with only my imagination and my iPhone as sustaining distractions. No more fancy scenery to oppose to my fear, to the constant worry that I mattered not a whit to anyone beyond myself. Put crassly, I didn't want a life in which the 2 train was how I did most of my traveling. Indeed, I now despised the subway, its screeching, the press of its surly, smelly throngs, the predicate of predetermined stops that shaped my daily itinerary. With Riaz, I rode about in that sleek black Mercedes limousine that had so enchanted Emily on their night out. I felt the same about that quiet enclave on wheels as it slipped through the city's hustle bustle, parting the crowds, fetching us from one door, dropping us at another. If we walked, it was because we wanted to. I knew I would never have money like that, but also had always known, the usual pittance that foundered in my checking account was not enough. I needed more, much more. The example of my friend Danielle Ramin had haunted me for years. Danielle was likely the most extravagantly talented of my college classmates, a theater artist who'd studied in Vermont at the Bread and Puppet Troupe before starting his own group in Brooklyn, a visionary designer and director whose arresting shows went up at the public and were invited to Avignon and Salzburg, a singular voice hailed by critics as a new world heir to Tadeusz Kantor, and a man who'd gone for much of his adult life without health insurance. He got married, he had a child, the pregnancy was covered by Medicaid, and so was the new family until they weren't. When Danielle was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, well, you can probably guess the rest of the story. It's in tropic denouement, by now as much a staple of American life as apple pie. A well-meaning crowdsourced appeal online raised enough money to keep the wolf from the door, but only for so long. Treatment was expensive. The medications alone ran into the hundreds of thousands, but his parents found the money. He survived. His theater company didn't. Neither did his marriage. Last I heard, he'd moved back home to North Carolina, where he was working at a Starbucks. At least the job gave him benefits. A once-in-a-generation talent, mind you, making double-shot extra wet lattes for realtors on their bathroom breaks between appointments. Danielle was but one of many I'd seen fall prey to the gap between the logic of their talents and the treachery of an American society that abandoned the weak and monetized the unlucky. You had to be brain dead not to know you couldn't really flourish in this country without inordinate amounts of cash or extraordinary luck. I'd been the beneficiary of the latter and had always worried how long I would make it without more of the former. In the wake of my experience with Riaz, the financier, my initiation, if you will, into the reality of the only good life in our great land, my concerns about money were no longer just prophylactic, no longer forms of worry about rainy days. No, now I realized what I'd been missing all along. Here was true freedom. Serious money was the only path to liberation from the indentured servitude of 21st century lower class and middle class American life. An artist? Really? Are you kidding me? And you expected what exactly? I think that's where you wanted me to stop.
Well, it's not where I wanted you to stop.
No,
But
it just goes on and on.
it felt like a fitting moment. Yeah. And I'm glad you took us back a little bit further from where I indicated you might start. When I read that, you know, in view of what is happening right now, and certainly within, as a theater artist with our industry, it doesn't matter if you're a Broadway star or somebody who's just starting out in your first job. I mean, those realities that you ascribe to Daniel, just like what every theater artist is thinking right now, because
I think we might be headed into a future of real indigence for a lot of people. And I hope that will be an education, because it's going to be a lot of suffering. And I hope that will be some sort of an education about trying to recognize that our individual rights should matter less than trying to understand what is good for the country, what's good for all of us. What is a definition of a collective good that we can all agree on? Because if we can't get there, we're just going to continue to slide.
Yeah.
Give me mine. I want to make as much money as I want. I want to be able to have the rights that I want. I want to be able to use whatever bathroom I want. All of that individualism. And it's not to say that there isn't value to all of that, but ultimately we as a country have got to find a place where we can come to an agreement about a collective good. And in a sense, this book is an attempt to articulate the malaise and the affliction of our rampant individualism.
I don't know exactly when you finished your last edit on it, on the book, before it sort of handed over to be published, but I suspect it was either just before or very close to the pandemic in March coming forward.
Yeah, it was just before that. Yeah.
And so, I just think about how life has changed for everybody. Well, globally, not, in the last 7 months nearly. We evacuated Milwaukee Rep and canceled a ton of shows. I think March 14th or 15th was the day we all decided we had to work remotely. I guess my question is, given how seismic that change has been for us all, if you were kind of 2/3 of your way through the book now, at this point where we are, do you think the book might have taken would there be things different to what is here?
No, because the book is an attempt to articulate, the Chinese have a proverb that says, in a house where the son kills the father, the causes do not lie between the morning and the evening of a single day. Our crumbling republic, which is really what it is, a country riven by divides, urban against rural, or rural against urban, heartland and coast, socioeconomic, racial, our inability to come to an agreement about what we are, what we stand for, what we should stand for, what sacrifices we're willing to make. I mean, who's willing to make a sacrifice anymore? Everybody wants what they want. And our inability to do all of those things, that's 40 years in the making, Mark. That didn't just happen. Trump is not the reason that happened. You know, this has been 40 years in the making. The ideological soil of this country has changed. It became acceptable to sell off our national infrastructure in order to make money for individuals. And we've seen that in Milwaukee. You know, we've seen the way that manufacturing has been gutted, right? And a lot of that is an ideological acceptance that individual flourishing should matter over what my ability to accomplish and have opportunity as an American matters more than sacrifice for the collective good. And that's what America has meant in many ways. But I feel like we've gone too far. And so the book is really the result of observing this change, and really in the last 10 years, how everything has been fraying at the edges, and the substructure of this, the ideological and actual infrastructure of the country, administrative and manufacturing and services, all of it, education, it just doesn't stop. It's been falling apart. It's been falling apart because it's been acceptable to not care about it. And that's an important shift, philosophical shift in our country that I wanted to articulate. The pandemic has just brought all of it out. We're now seeing all of the rot.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not the Republicans' fault, it's not the Democrats, it's all of our fault. We've all participated in this.
Yeah. You alluded earlier on to, like, Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin not being the state you recognize anymore. And obviously, you've had family here. Your parents have passed away in fairly recent times, both of them. And you have a brother here still. And you have your relationship with us here. So, you know, we've seen you on and off, but primarily you're based in New York. And I just wondered, like, can you just expand? You do in the novel a little bit about Wisconsin being different, but can you just expand on that a little bit? Because I think the way you frame it up in the novel is interesting to hear.
I think one of the stories that I tell is a story about healthcare, right? Because in the book, my father is a doctor, and he's dealing with the healthcare system. He's a prominent doctor, and he gets sued for malpractice in the western regions of the state, out by La Crosse, where a jury of his fellow citizens is going to determine really his legacy as an American. And the story, that story is really the story of how a class of MBAs, you know, those with Masters of Business Administration, have come in to American industry and taken over, if you will, the decision-making about practices they know nothing about. So that spreadsheets and numbers have become the determinant factor in decision-making when it comes to patient care. And the ramifications of this play themselves out in my father's life because of a decision that he makes to spend more time with a particular patient that results in a cascade of consequences that ultimately result in her passing away, and then he gets sued. And so the story that I'm trying to tell is it's a small human story between me and my father as he's struggling with this malpractice lawsuit and all of that, but it's against the canvas of a much larger change in which, you know, you see it in farming in Wisconsin. We've seen it in paper. It's been cheaper for about 15 years now to cut trees down. It used to be that the state of Wisconsin made more paper than anywhere else in the world. Now it's cheap. In the last 15 years, it's become cheaper to cut down trees in Wisconsin, put them on a container, ship them to China, have the paper made in China, shipped back to Wisconsin, wrapped and shipped out and sold. It's cheaper to do it that way than for us to make the paper ourselves. And there's a genealogy behind this. There are reasons why this has happened. And so what that's done to the texture of life in the state, you know, it's made life really hard for folks. For a lot of folks, it's made life really hard. And folks are looking for somebody to blame, understandably. But the causes are so much larger and systemic, and they have to do with us accepting that it's okay to privilege the making of money for individuals over the collective well-being of our state. It's that simple. And that's the ideology that has become acceptable in America. So you can tell some of the passion. I haven't gotten passionate like this on any of the other events because you're such a good friend, so I feel comfortable. But that's the passion that's going into the book. It's an attempt to try to articulate as a dramatic thinker, as a dramatic writer, what has happened to our country.
Thank you. I'm noticing we're at 7:45. I've got one more question, which I think may preempt some other questions. But if you have a question for Ayad, put it in the Q&A box. I think that's what you'll see. And I will try and between then and when this next question is answered, between then and 8:10, to do as many as I can. I'll do my best to field them and see what we can do. I guess the question, I was going to ask you this at the beginning. There is a lot in this book that, because we've talked about you being the same person as the narrator in this fictional book. And, anyone who, I've had a lot of questions because people know that I know you well, and they're like, so that bit about whatever is constantly being asked. And I did see a comment coming up like, which is reality? How are you answering that? I mean, is it like a sort of Pinterest thing of read what you will, make of it what you will?
I'm trying not to be evasive about it, because I think it's a good question. It's a real question. It's a question folks are really having, and I understand it. I think, the beginning of the second chapter goes into this, that the very complex relationship between real life and the transformation of real life into effective narrative is a mysterious process. And I try to walk the reader through in that second chapter. I walk the reader through the entire process, and it becomes mysterious again. There's just no way to explain it. Maria Semple last night did an event with her wonderful novelist, Seattle-based novelist, and she came up with an analogy which I think is really good and correct. She said, it seems to me that you had to forget your whole life when you sat down to write this, and then you started to write and you just used pieces you wanted and you changed pieces that didn't fit the purpose, and you just kind of let it take its own shape. And that's exactly what happened. Yes, of course, I'm drawing from my own life, and I'm drawing from my parents' lives, but I'm changing so much as it unfolds that it's not responsible to call it memoir anymore. I'd get in trouble. I get in trouble for lying. So I'm trying to tell the truth by saying it's a novel. And I think people think I'm lying by saying it's a novel because it's really true. But all of that seems to me that's the right space for this book to exist in right now, because it really is trying to mirror something about our reality, some shift. So I lean into it. I really lean into it.
It's kind of like the Glass Menagerie, that play, Tom. It's like it's partly selective memory, where you, even talking about a relationship, for example, the one with Asha, is that. But
the thing about the Glass Menagerie, Mark, is that Tennessee Williams is not trying to say to the viewer, oh, this is me. He's saying, yeah, this is probably related to my life, but I'm still calling this guy Tom. In this book, I'm saying this is me.
Right.
And then I'm calling it a novel. And then I've got my narrator lying at certain points to various people in the book. So he's a casual liar, this narrator who's narrating the book, which is pretending to be real, but is being called a novel. So all of that dubiousness, that kind of epistemological dubiousness, the uncertainty about knowing what's happening or what something is, that's by design. It's by design.
Dinner parties are going to be very interesting for you, because people are going to be answering a polite question, and by the end by dessert they're going to be asking you if you did have syphilis. So I think you've opened the door for a lot of questions for a long time. But
there've been a couple of reviews that have basically, exactly. Questions coming
There's
in?
a question, yeah, there's a question from, well, there's actually someone from Laurie Murphy who says, "Hey Ed, so great to see you. Your old high school pal, Laurie Custerman Murphy."
Oh my God, Lori Custerman. Hi, Lori.
Kathy Brownlee has a question. She says, "We haven't done it well, as you say, the country. What country do you think has?"
I'm not sure that that's what kind of a question is that? I mean,
I'm assuming we're
it's
talking.
not about, the point here is not to criticize America to make Americans feel bad or for us to feel bad as Americans. We've got to do better for ourselves. This is not about saying America's a bad place. America's a great place. So what? We need to be better, a more perfect union. So I mean, respectfully and with affection to that questioner, I reject the question. I don't understand that question. That's not, the Green Bay Packers are never going to be a great team by saying, well, what team's doing better than we are? You got to do better. That's the nature of wanting to do something well or be something good. You've got to keep trying to be better. We have to keep trying to be better. And I think that maybe latent in that question is a sense that maybe I'm an outsider, maybe, and I'm saying something about America. No, I'm an American too, and I'm saying I'm invested in this project also. We are in it together.
Richard Gustin has a question about how has your Wisconsin identity informed your worldview and artistry?
I grew up in a state where folks were really welcoming and incredibly generous. I never felt like rejected or sort of like, prejudiced against or anything growing up. And so I think that open-heartedness and there's a kind of plain, well, I'm not plain spoken clearly, but but straightforwardness that comes from the Midwest. And I think that's part of my identity. That's part of who I am, is that I'm not interested in, I want to just, I'm a straight shooter in an open-hearted, or aspire to be a straight shooter in an open-hearted way. And I think that's central to my artistic identity as well. It's gotten me into some trouble with folks here on the East Coast at times, because they can't imagine that I would be sincere. And of course, there's got to be some level of irony, right? No, I'm pretty sincere. I remember Annika, my fiance, who's from the East Coast, she came to Wisconsin for the first time. And she said, wow, I understand now. Like, everybody smiles at you out and they're like, say hi. And if you stop, they'll start talking to you. That's like you're always doing that. I was like, what's your angle? Why are you doing? I was like, well, that's how I grew up. So.
I have a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Anup Prakash. I haven't read the book yet. However, very interested in your father's journey. How have you observed his view of America's change over the years? I think you do get a good degree of that in this novel, of course. But
yeah, I think it's how my own personal father, and how this father in the book see America is both overlaps and is different. I think it would be hard for me. I haven't really thought that much about how to represent what my actual father actually thought about, because he thought a lot of different things. And toward the end of his life, he, thought different things if he was in one mood versus another. And I don't know what the core reality is. I do know that he missed what he called home. And what he meant by home was Pakistan. And that never really fundamentally changed as much as he loved America. I think he still felt back home was Pakistan. For me and my brother, this is home. That was never home for us. We spent a lot of time there as kids and whatnot, but we never lived there. We never felt like it was our home. So I think that it would be hard to answer that question other than to say that I don't know that my father ever felt that he became an American, if you will. And maybe earlier in his life thought that was something that would happen, that he would feel that way someday. But I'm not sure that he ever did.
Yeah, it seems in the novel that there are moments where he feels a great affinity and a great advocate for the country, and then this sort of sense.
Oh, in the novel, he's bought in. He loves it. I mean, that's the polarity of the book, is that the father really represents this, and authentically, because there's a lot of, as I said, overlap with my own father, but just a real embrace of the American can-do and American opportunity and American freedom and all of that sort of stuff. And the mother in the book is a little bit more reticent about some of those things because she really does miss being home, and she really does think that life would maybe be better if she was over there. So,
yeah. Diane Kane has a big question. She says, please talk about the reaction of the Muslim community. She says to your plays, but I think it should be, the question should be to your work.
You know, not great. I think a lot of people feel like that when I'm writing complex characters, that I'm making Muslims look bad. And, you know, I think that some of that is on the reader. Some of that's on non-Muslim readers who are maybe less interested in nuance. And some of that's on Muslim readers who are not willing to accord their non-Muslim cohorts the ability to see through complexity and recognize that, you know, it's like I often joke that if all you ever read was Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams and Sam Shepard, and, you know, that you would think that all white Americans were drunk and they loved incest. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, drama, you know, if you read Greek tragedy, you'd think that the human being is this really, I mean, that psychosis and sort of antisocial aggression is the norm of humankind. Drama is about extreme moments of human experience. And so writing to some bland middle that is, you know, appealing to everybody is, I don't know, that's okay for, you know, a healthcare ad, you know, Aetna healthcare coverage, like a commercial for that, like, sure, a sun-drenched kitchen with a really lovely family, a multiracial family enjoying eggs. Oh, they're like us. That's not art, that's advertising. And so I could be making a lot more money doing advertising, but that's not what I chose to do with my life. So I don't know that exactly answers the question, but that's, I mean, I'm talking around the question.
Yeah, I think, as I said at the beginning, I really welcome the conversation of the exploration of gray in your work, because I'm exhausted, quite frankly, with reductive conversations, you know, just about where we put people into because of one aspect of their life, and that's the summation of a whole person.
Yeah, you're a white male. You got to stop talking. That's a reduction of your, you know, it's just, it's hard. It's hard to inhabit that. I get it. I do. And I also get folks who are saying, well, you know, I'm not a white male and nobody's ever let me talk. So, and in between those two things is where we are now. It's just a complicated time. And it's without the ability to speak to that, to speak to the place between those 2 points of view, I don't know how we're ever going to get through anything. Yeah.
Switching to a kind of different.
You kind of shut down. I didn't mean to shut you down. I was just making manifest what you were latently, you know, suggesting. Because I think it's important to say it.
I was listening.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
CJ wants to know, could you talk about the difference for you between writing a play and writing a novel? What makes you choose one form over another for a given narrative?
Good question, to which I have a facile answer, and then I have a more profound answer, or at least a more considered answer. The facile answer, and which is equally true, is that what I love about writing fiction is that I get to do it by myself, and that's what I hate about it. And what I love about writing plays is I get to do it with other people, and that's what I hate about that. But what it speaks to is that I need both in my life. And so I kind of go back and forth. But that doesn't answer the question of why one story presents itself in one version versus another. In this case, it was so clear that the story would have to run across so many locales, and there was so much interiority to it that I needed to speak to things directly. In a play, you tell the story through dialogue and the audience infers so much, but you never really say things outright. In a novel, you really can address the reader. You're speaking directly to the reader. So that was something that it was a natural fit for this material.
Nick, one of our ex-employees. So I've been devouring Rick Perlstein's books covering the rise of modern American conservatism.
Also a Milwaukeean. I don't know if folks know that. He's from Milwaukee too, yeah.
I did not. He seeks to transform academic history into popular narrative, which reads like fiction, but it's real. Yeah. You also use history to frame your fiction. How do you determine the right amount to include without distracting from your interpersonal drama?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the craft, and it's about moving through the story and rereading and reworking and getting feedback and hopefully finding that balance all the time. Rick Perlstein's amazing. I mean, it's really, really extraordinary project that he's involved in American history. And I think we're all going to be very, very grateful to him when he completes all of that work. I mean, we already are, but yeah, it's a great question. It's a balance. I can't do what Rick Perlstein's doing. I gotta deliver a lot more personal and dramatic goods.
Paul Kozadowski, nice to hear from you, Paul. Really good, right? I think you've explored this, but let's see if there's another angle in. How does your experience in the theater relate to the dual identity of the narrator in the novel? Real Ayad, fictional Ayad. It seems a little like the relationship of actor and character, different realities skipping back and forth.
Oh, that's very interesting. I think that's a really thoughtful remark. I would have to think about that. But I do think that there is an aspect of when you're an actor and you're inhabiting a character, you can start to feel like you can speak for that character, and that there's a reality to the fictiveness, right? It's like do as if, and then you'll feel like. So yeah, maybe there is a bit of that to it. Yeah.
I just want to actually talk while seeing if there's any more coming in the final moments, but Sarah Risley says hi. She loves the novel, and it's invading her dreams. Yikes!
Okay, wow.
Can you talk a little bit about being the newly appointed president of PEN, and just tell us a little bit about that organization,
sure.
And why you took the role and what you hope to do with it.
PEN America is an organization founded by writers 100 years ago. Which endeavors to celebrate the ability of literature to speak truth to power, and also to celebrate the creation of literature. And the organization has evolved a lot over 100 years, and you do a lot of stuff now, a lot of advocacy on behalf of writers, and a lot of helping writers in distress across the world, imprisoned writers, and folks who are speaking out, again, truth to power. And in the last 4 years, we've been doing more and more of that here in this country. And so I've been involved in the organization about 5 years. Jennifer Egan has been president, and I've been sort of vice chair of the board, and now I'm taking over the presidency. And I'm excited. One of the things that we've been doing a lot in the last few years is pushing out away from New York City into the heartland. We're opening chapters across the country, and I'm hoping that we'll do more and more of that. I really feel like I would love our organization to be a place where writers and thinkers across America can convene. And, so that's, and I continue to make the case that writing, reading, literature can matter to our public discourse, that it does matter to our public discourse, that it's not just something that folks do because they have time to do it and it's something that they like to do and it gives them feelings that they like to have. That there's something important and socially valuable about literature.
From Donald Peterson, he says, you talk about Robert Walker a lot and mention resentment in rural Wisconsin. Catherine Kramer wrote a whole book about that. How much of that is research or just your observation on what is going on in the US?
Both. Politics of Resentment is an amazing book, and so is The Fall of Wisconsin by Dan Kaufman. But I've been following all of this. It's been great reporting at the Cap Times and great reporting at the Milwaukee, Journal Sentinel for years about what's been happening in the state. And my folks have had property up north, and I've spent a fair bit of time up north and across the state in various places. So, Wisconsin matters to me. It's my home. It's where I grew up, and I do love it. So,
so we are at time. Thank you, Ed, for doing this. Daniel, do you want to just close us out and shut down the event or whatever you do officially.
Cut the string that drops the event and crashes to the floor. Well, I would like to thank both of you for a wonderful evening. We are looking forward to all the wonderful things that are going to happen with this book, and we're also looking forward to the wonderful things that continue to happen with the Milwaukee Rep in the reset season, and that former 2020-21, which I think is now 2021-22, but we'll see. Just like theater, the bookstore takes each day as it comes, and we just never know. Our last day of business was full day was March 16th, and for a while we thought that if we just took all the couches and threw them in the center of the room and put a tarp on top and said, "This is an art installation, please do not touch," that we might be okay, and that went for one day. So thanks everybody for coming. We wouldn't have a virtual bookstore. You're at the Chicago Humanities Festival
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow, so people can be the equivalent of a deadhead and just go to all your events.
They have better things to do.
I don't know. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.